How many times have you wanted something without asking yourself why you wanted it? Without examining whether that desire was born from you or from a wound begging for compensation? You want success to prove something. You want a relationship so you don't have to face your own company. You want money to silence a voice that keeps insisting you're worthless. And when you get it, you get everything that was embedded in the request along with it. The fear, the neediness, and the need for control. You never stop to think about who's affected by what you bring into the world. Reality isn't private property. Every manifested desire reorganizes a field that others also inhabit. The question you're avoiding isn't whether you can, it's whether you should and whether you have the internal structure to bear the weight of what you're asking for.
The law that governs manifestation is impersonal. It doesn't evaluate merit, it doesn't judge intention, and it doesn't distinguish between what seems noble and what seems petty. It responds to the pattern imprinted in consciousness, to the state sustained with feeling, and delivers corresponding results. Always. This neutrality is often celebrated as freedom. You can create anything you're able to assume as real. But this same neutrality carries an implication that most people prefer not to examine. If the state of consciousness is the cause and external reality is the effect, then each person operates as a continuous creative center. Not occasionally, not only when applying a specific technique, but all the time. The world you inhabit reflects what you sustain internally, your deep convictions about yourself, about others, about what's possible and what isn't. This isn't a metaphor, it's mechanics. And mechanics don't make sentimental concessions. The problem appears when this understanding is reduced to an acquisition tool. The dominant question becomes, how do I get what I want? And the entire system is placed in service of desires that have never been examined. The job, the money, the relationship, the approval, and the victory over those who doubted. The law delivers. It really does. But along with the delivery come consequences that were embedded in the original pattern itself. Consequences that the hasty practitioner didn't calculate because they were too busy celebrating that it worked. There's a difference between knowing how to operate a mechanism and understanding what you're doing when you operate it. Individual consciousness doesn't function in isolation. It operates as a focal point within a shared mental field. What's imprinted there isn't contained within the boundaries of a particular experience. Every assumed state reverberates. Every creation reorganizes relationships, resources, and flows of energy that belong to a fabric larger than the personal interest of whoever manifested. Ignoring this is possible, but ignorance doesn't suspend consequence. The ethical question of manifestation isn't moralism imported from traditional religious systems. It's a direct implication of the very structure of the process. If you're using power, and you are, then the direction of that use matters. It matters for the quality of your own experience in the medium term. It matters for the people who will be affected by what you bring into the world. It matters for the type of reality you're reinforcing with each internal decree transformed into an external fact. This involves understanding the nature of the power at play, identifying where desires really emerge from, perceiving how each personal creation affects the collective field, distinguishing between what the ego wants and what something deeper is asking for, recognizing the cost of manifesting without criteria, and finally, deciding whether you're going to keep operating as a spiritual consumer or assume the role of conscious co-author, the ability to manifest what you already have. The question is what you do with it. The mind is creative, not in the sense of a pleasant fantasy that dissolves when you open your eyes, creative in the operational sense. What's sustained internally with consistency and feeling organizes itself as external experience. Visualization, affirmation, the law of attraction, the law of assumption. Behind the differences in vocabulary and technique, the principle is the same. Internal state operates as cause, and external circumstance appears as effect. This isn't philosophy for abstract debates. It's a description of how things work. And this functioning implies something that most people don't consider when they start studying manifestation. There's a creative intelligence that responds to the impressions it receives. You can call it the one mind, universal consciousness, or creative substance. The name matters less than the mechanics. This intelligence receives impressions in the form of mental images sustained with vividness, words repeated with conviction, emotional states cultivated over time, and deep-seated beliefs about who you are and what life allows. And it responds automatically, without evaluating merit, without moral judgment. It organizes experience according to the imprinted pattern, regardless of whether that pattern is healthy or destructive, mature or childish, generous or petty. Whoever learns to use this deliberately acquires power, real capacity to direct energy, focus, and feeling consistently enough to see reality respond. Circumstances change, doors open, people act in ways that seemed unlikely, and resources appear, not by chance, not by luck, not by coincidence, by direct correspondence to what was cultivated internally. Any serious practitioner has already verified this in their own experience. The law works, but this confirmation usually generates a dangerous euphoria. The person discovers that it works and immediately transforms the practice into an acquisition tool. They want more, they want it fast, and they want it now. They don't stop to ask what it means to have access to a mechanism like this. They don't examine the implications of holding in their hands the capacity to reorganize their own reality and, as we'll see later, the shared reality. Power is the capacity to produce an effect. The greater the possible effect, the greater the weight of the choices involved. This is elementary logic applicable to any domain. But in the field of manifestation, this logic is conveniently forgotten. There's a lot of talk about creating the life of your dreams, but little about examining which dreams deserve to be created. There's talk about removing blocks, but almost nothing about questioning whether certain desires are blocks disguised as goals. Every thought felt as real acts as a seed in fertile soil. This isn't a comforting metaphor. It's a description of a process. Repeated internal states transform into invisible causes of visible events. What you cultivate in the mind doesn't stay confined to the mind. It gains body, form, and circumstance. It appears as an event, an encounter, an opportunity, or a disaster, depending on what was planted. And here emerges the dimension that separates the naive practitioner from the conscious practitioner. The knowledge that allows you to manifest healing allows you to manifest manipulation. The law that sustains genuine reconciliation equally sustains revenge dressed up as justice. The mechanism that generates authentic prosperity is identical to the one that generates compulsive accumulation born from internal emptiness. There isn't one law for noble intentions and another for questionable ones. There's one law, and it responds to the pattern, not to the label you put on it. How many people use manifestation techniques to get relationships where they can exercise control? How many seek professional success driven by the need to prove superiority to those who doubted them? How many want money not for genuine freedom, but to numb a wound of insufficiency that remains open beneath the bank account? The law delivers what was asked for. It delivers the controlling relationship, the bitter success, and the money that doesn't fulfill. It delivers exactly the pattern, along with everything that was embedded in it. If the individual mind functions as an access point to this greater creative intelligence, if each consciousness is a focus through which this power expresses itself, then using the law means using something that doesn't belong exclusively to you. You're exercising, on a personal scale, a capacity that belongs to the entire field of existence. every internal decree carries weight beyond your particular interest. Every state assumed as true doesn't affect only your private life, it affects the fabric. The beginner's question is, does it work? That's already been answered. It works. The question that comes after is the one that defines the quality of the path. Where am I directing this? What kind of reality am I feeding every time I sustain a particular state? What version of myself gains strength when I assume certain feelings as true? In the service of what am I placing this capacity? Manifestation isn't a trick. It's not an acquisition technique for collecting experiences and possessions like trophies of spiritual efficacy. It's an act with implications for whoever manifests, for whoever is affected, and for the collective field that absorbs each individual creation. It demands responsibility proportional to the force it places in the hands of whoever executes it. Ignoring this is an available option. The law keeps working just the same, but an ignored consequence isn't a cancelled consequence. It's just a delayed consequence. Recognizing manifestation as power is the first move. What comes immediately after is perceiving that not every desire that arises in consciousness deserves to be transformed into a decree. Some desires come from places you'd prefer not to examine. Desires aren't all equal. They seem equal because they arrive in consciousness the same way, as want, as impulse, as an image of what you desire. But the origin varies radically. Some desires are born from fullness, others are born from a whole. And the place from which the desire emerges determines the type of experience it's going to generate when it materializes. The law responds to the state's assumption as true, not to the verbalized desire, not to the declared intention, not to what you say you want, but to what you feel is real about yourself in the present moment. If someone intensely desires a relationship, but the internal state they're sustaining is, I'm someone who can't be loved, the law doesn't receive the instruction, give me a relationship. It receives the instruction, I'm someone who can't be loved, and organizes corresponding circumstances. The relationship might even appear, but it appears crooked, marked by the same neediness that invoked it. The person gets what they asked for and continues feeling the same emptiness as before. Sometimes worse, because now they have proof that even getting what they wanted doesn't make them feel complete. This happens because many desires are, in reality, attempts to compensate for wounds that were never looked at. Comparison with others generates the desire for status. Fear of abandonment generates the desire to control people. Trauma from humiliation generates the desire to prove superiority. The feeling of invisibility generates the desire for fame, recognition, and constant validation. These desires seem legitimate. They seem like reasonable goals. But when you assume them as a state and manifest them, you're not creating expansion. You're extending the reach of the same wound that generated them. The person who manifests professional success to prove they're not inferior keeps needing to prove it, now on a larger scale, with more exposure, more pressure, and more fear of losing what they've conquered. The person who manifests money to finally feel secure discovers that the number in the account doesn't resolve the internal insecurity and starts needing more, always more, because the hole isn't filled with figures. The person who manifests a partner so they won't be alone attracts someone who reflects exactly the desperation that motivated the search. The law delivers, but it delivers the complete pattern, not the edited version you'd like to receive. There's another type of desire. It emerges from a different place and carries a different quality. It doesn't come from lack, but from something that's already present and wants to express itself. A calling that appears calmly, without desperate urgency. A vision of life that, just by being contemplated, already brings a certain peace, before it even materializes. The desire to create something that didn't exist, to contribute something that makes sense, to express a capacity that seems genuinely yours. These desires don't shout, they don't obsess, they don't carry the bitter taste of, I need this to be someone. They have a different flavor. This wants to be born through me. The tradition that teaches manifestation calls this alignment by different names: perfect pattern, divine right, purpose. The names vary. What remains constant is the distinction. There are desires that correspond to what you really are in essence, and there are desires that correspond to the distortions you've accumulated along the way. Both of them work. The law doesn't differentiate. You're the one who needs to differentiate if you want any chance of creating a life that doesn't crumble on the inside, even while looking solid on the outside. The question that changes everything isn't, can I manifest this? If you've trained enough, you probably can. The question that matters comes before and goes beyond. Where is this desire coming from? And where does it lead me if it materializes? If it comes from compensation, it will generate more compensation. You step onto a treadmill with no end. You achieve, it's not enough, you need more. You achieve again, and it still isn't enough. The original whole remains intact, now decorated with accomplishments that solve nothing. If it comes from genuine expression, it generates more life. The manifestation doesn't end the movement. It opens space for the next step, which also makes sense, which also wants to be born, which also connects with something greater. This demands a type of honesty that most practitioners prefer to avoid, because looking at the origin of the desire often means finding uncomfortable things. It means admitting that that grand goal might be an attempt to silence an internal voice that keeps repeating, "You're worthless." It means recognizing that that idealized relationship might be an escape from confronting your own inability to be with yourself. It means seeing that the urgency to manifest might itself be a symptom of a state of neediness that will reproduce itself in anything you manifest from it. Maturity in manifestation includes this discernment. Not every impulse that appears in the mind deserves to be promoted to a decree. Not every desire that arises needs to be assumed as a state and launched into the law. Some desires need to be seen, understood, and sometimes dissolved, not realized. The ability to make this distinction is what separates those who use the law as a growth tool from those who use it as an instrument for perpetuating their own cycle. Desires of compensation ask for healing, not manifestation. Desires of expression ask for passage, knowing which is which changes the entire game. Up to this point, the conversation has stayed in individual territory, your states, your desires, and your consequences. But this is only half of the equation. There's a dimension that manifestation culture almost never addresses, and it radically changes the way of thinking about what it means to create reality. Individual consciousness doesn't operate in a private vacuum. It functions as a focal point within a shared mental field. The image frequently used is that of waves in an ocean. Each consciousness is a distinct wave with its own form and movement, but they're all made of the same water. They all move in the same ocean, and they all affect and are affected by the movement of the others. There's no such thing as a truly isolated thought. There are different foci within the same mental substance. This isn't philosophical abstraction, it's the operational premise of the law itself. If consciousness creates reality, and if all consciousnesses participate in a single field, then every state assumed by an individual isn't contained within the edges of that person's private experience. It propagates. Every image sustained with intensity, every conviction cultivated with feeling, every internal decree charged with faith, all of this introduces a pattern into the shared field. Think about the environment of an office where most people live in a state of petty competition and fear of losing their position. Nobody needs to say anything out loud. The atmosphere is there. It's palpable. Anyone who enters that space feels the weight, even without knowing how to explain where it comes from. This is a mental atmosphere, patterns of emotional states and internal images that, from being repeated by so many consciousnesses, become almost tangible. They affect mood, decisions, relationships, and even physical health. The same principle operates in the opposite direction. Environments where states of collaboration, abundance without desperation, and genuine respect predominate have a different quality. You feel the difference in your body when you walk in. Every individual manifestation contributes to the formation of these atmospheres. When someone intensively works on an internal state and brings it to external experience, they're not just reorganizing their own circumstances. They're reorganizing relationships, resources, and flows of attention and energy that belong to a larger system. Every manifestation pulls elements from the shared field into a particular configuration. Opportunities you capture are opportunities that moved in your direction and not in another. People you attract into your life begin to orbit your center instead of someone else's. Resources that flow to you were flowing somewhere else before they changed course. None of this is a problem when the manifestation is aligned with something genuine and contributes to the field as much as it extracts from it. The system is abundant. There's no real scarcity of possibilities. But when the manifestation serves exclusively the interest of an ego that doesn't care about the impact around it, something different happens. The person gets what they want at the expense of others. They manipulate to gain advantage, assume states of domination over colleagues, and manifest success that depends on someone else's diminishment. The result appears. The law doesn't refuse. But the cost distributes itself in ways the manifestor rarely anticipates. In the short term, it looks like victory. The promotion came. The deal closed. The person who was in the way disappeared from the path. But in the medium term, the bill arrives. On the outside, it might be conflicts that multiply, instability that doesn't cease, and environments that become progressively more toxic around whoever manifested this way. On the inside, the collection is even more precise. Diffuse guilt that you don't know where it comes from, anxiety that has no clear object, and a feeling of disconnection even while surrounded by accomplishments. The field registers distortions, and whoever introduced the distortion doesn't escape the field. They continue living in it, breathing what they helped create. This places the ethical question on another level. It's not just about what do I want, or even where does this desire come from? The question expands. What movement does this generate in the collective fabric if I bring this into the world? If I manifest this form of success, this type of relationship, this configuration of power, what enters the field because of it? What kind of pattern am I reinforcing in the mental atmosphere that we all breathe? Manifesting isn't taking something from an external universe that exists separately from you. It's introducing form, pattern, and vibrational quality into a web of which you're an inseparable part. Every creation is a contribution, for better or worse. Every state sustained and made fact adds its weight to the collective scale. When this dimension enters the field of vision, the practice changes. Not out of moralism, not out of fear of cosmic punishment, but out of understanding that you're not operating in a closed room. Every choice about what to manifest is also a choice about what you're willing to put into the world for others to encounter. It's a choice about what kind of environment you're helping to build, not just for yourself, but for the entire field. Whoever understands this begins to select with more care the states they assume and the projects they give strength to, not because they've lost the freedom to manifest whatever they want, but because they've understood that freedom and responsibility are two sides of the same coin, and that living in a shared field means that nobody creates only for themselves. Not every will is born from the same place. You can want something with intensity, feel urgency, and invest energy, and still be obeying a part of yourself that has no idea what it really needs. Within each person, there are at least two sources of will, and they point in very different directions. The first is the ego's will. This part of consciousness accumulated memories, constructed a personal story, registered victories and defeats, learned to compare itself with others, and learned to measure its own worth by external criteria. The ego carries the scars of every rejection, the memory of every humiliation, and the catalogue of all the times you felt small, ignored, and insufficient. And it wants compensation. The will that emerges from this layer has recognizable characteristics. It's anxious. It's in a hurry. It reacts more than it chooses. It wants to prove its worth to those who doubted. It wants to control people and situations, so it's never caught off guard again. It wants to collect symbols of success that function as a shield against the possibility of being seen as a failure. This will isn't interested in genuine expression. It's interested in protection, in validation, and in winning a battle that often doesn't even exist anymore, except in the internal repetition of old wounds. When manifestation operates from the ego, the assumed states carry this flavor. I won over someone. Nobody is going to hurt me anymore. I finally proved that I'm better than they thought. These states work. The law responds to them just as it responds to any other pattern imprinted with consistency and feeling. But what manifests carries the DNA of its origin embedded within it. Success in proving superiority comes accompanied by constant fear of losing the position. A relationship to never be alone again attracts partners who mirror the same desperate neediness. Money to silence critics doesn't silence the internal voice that keeps repeating, "You don't deserve it." The second source of will operates from another place. It's quieter. It doesn't shout and doesn't have the frantic urgency of the ego. It appears as a quiet calling, a direction that makes sense even when it doesn't solve any immediate problem. It seeks authentic expression. It wants to create, contribute, and serve something that goes beyond narrow personal interest. It's interested in beauty, in truth, and in forms of expansion that include others instead of needing to diminish them. When the law is used from this layer, the assumed states have a different texture. I live in coherence with what I am. My prosperity expands the abundance available around me. My relationships are fields of mutual growth. The law doesn't differentiate between these states and the ego states. It responds to the pattern. But what manifests carries a completely different quality. Success that comes from genuine expression doesn't need to be defended tooth and nail. A relationship that's born from real presence doesn't suffocate or imprison. Prosperity that emerges from authentic contribution doesn't generate the anxiety of losing everything at any moment. The practical difference is verifiable in the experience of whoever pays attention. Accomplishments born from the ego demand constant maintenance. They seem solid on the outside, but inside, there's always something fragile, something that can collapse if external validation fails. Accomplishments born from the deeper will have a different stability. They don't depend on others' opinions to make sense. They exist because they express something true, and that's enough. From this emerges a compass that any practitioner can use before investing energy in a state or project. If this manifests, does the environment around me become more alive, freer, and truer? Or does it just become more favorable to my image while charging a price from everything else? This filter separates what's worth creating from what's going to become one more structure you need to sustain, while it drains your energy from within. The power to manifest remains the same in both cases. The law obeys the pattern, regardless of which layer of consciousness generated it. What changes is who's sitting at the control panel. If it's the wounded ego, the direction will always be the same. more protection, more proof, more compensation, more running in a circle that leads nowhere. If it's the consciousness that knows why it came, the direction points toward another horizon, expression of what already is, contribution of what makes sense, and creation that leaves the field a little more habitable. Most people never stop to make this distinction. They assume that wanting is wanting, and any desire that appears deserves to be pursued with all available force. This confusion is the origin of much suffering disguised as success, of many accomplishments that don't satisfy, of many manifestations that work perfectly and still leave an ashen taste in the mouth. Learning to recognize which source the will is emerging from is a skill that develops. It requires presence, it requires honesty, and it requires willingness to see what we'd prefer not to see about ourselves. But this is what separates the immature use of the law from the use that truly transforms, not just external circumstances, but the quality of the being who's creating. The law remains available, neutral, precise, and obedient to the pattern. The question that determines everything is, who's going to use it? The ego that collects trophies to hide wounds, or something deeper that recognizes manifestation as an act of participation in a living field and chooses to create accordingly. The law that governs manifestation is neutral. This has already been said, but it needs to be repeated until the complete implication is absorbed. Neutral means it doesn't filter. It doesn't evaluate whether what you're imprinting is going to do you good or harm. It doesn't ask whether the desire is mature or childish, whether it comes from healing or from a wound, whether it's going to build something solid or create a structure that crumbles at the first pressure. It responds to the pattern. Period. This means that confused emotional states also take form, ambivalent intentions also materialize, unexamined desires also convert into experience. The law doesn't wait for you to resolve your internal contradictions before delivering results. It delivers what's there, including the contradiction. What happens when someone uses manifestation without a filter? When any desire that appears is immediately promoted to a decree without asking where it came from, what it's in service of, or what kind of life it's going to generate if realized. Something specific happens. The person gets what they asked for and discovers that something is wrong. The achievement arrives, but it doesn't bring the promised satisfaction. The relationship materializes, but it suffocates instead of liberating. The money appears, but the anxiety increases along with the balance. The recognition comes, but it needs to be constantly renewed because it's never enough. This is the signature of misaligned manifestations. They work on the outside and crumble on the inside. There are people who spend years in this cycle without noticing the pattern. They attribute the dissatisfaction to having asked for the wrong thing and try again, asking for something else. Or they conclude that the problem is not having asked for enough and double the bet. More money, more success, more relationships, and more accomplishments. The treadmill spins faster and faster. The feeling of emptiness remains intact, and the person keeps not understanding why achieving goals doesn't solve what needs to be solved. The problem was never the technique. The law worked perfectly. The problem was what was put into it. States of neediness generate needy achievements. States of fear generate fragile achievements. States of revenge generate bitter achievements. Manifestation delivers with surgical precision exactly what was imprinted, including everything that was hidden beneath the declared intention. When manifestation is used as an escape tool, the result is even more destructive. The person doesn't want to look at a trauma, so they manifest distractions. They don't want to face a toxic relationship pattern, so they manifest new partners who repeat the same cycle. They don't want to take responsibility for something, so they manifest circumstances that seem to exempt them. The law delivers. It delivers the distraction, the repeated partner, and the apparent exemption. But what was being avoided doesn't disappear. It only reconfigures itself in a new scenario. These are houses built on sand. They require increasing effort to be kept standing. Each misaligned achievement needs another achievement to sustain it, which needs another, which needs another. The structure becomes increasingly elaborate and increasingly unstable, until a wave comes that's strong enough and takes everything. The person loses what they had manifested and doesn't understand what happened, because they never understood what they were building from the beginning. The cycle has another component that's rarely discussed. Whoever manifests this way develops a compulsive relationship with the techniques. They use reality creation as an anesthetic. Whenever internal discomfort arises, instead of looking at it, the person seeks to manifest something new that covers the whole. One more proof that the method works. One more achievement for the spiritual resume. One more distraction from the question that remains unanswered. Why isn't any of this filling what needs to be filled? The proposal isn't to stop manifesting. It's to let the desire pass through filters before being transformed into an internal decree. Simple questions that change everything. What do I want this for? In the service of what is this manifestation? What kind of human being do I become if this becomes reality? If the answer to these questions reveals compensation, escape, or an attempt to prove something, the desire doesn't need to be manifested. It needs to be understood, sometimes dissolved. What survives this process of maturation is different. It has roots. It has structure. It doesn't depend on external achievements to sustain itself. When you manifest from there, the result isn't a house on sand. It's something that withstands wind, rain, and time, because it was built on a foundation that doesn't need constant validation to exist. The creative law remains available, neutral, and precise. The difference is what you choose to put into it after you've learned to ask the right questions. There's a way of approaching manifestation that transforms everything into a big metaphysical shopping mall. The creative mind becomes a shelf, desires become a shopping list, and the practitioner becomes a consumer trying to take as much as possible before the store closes. This mindset is behind the question, should I manifest everything I can? As if the question were only about capacity, as if the only relevant limit were technical. Whoever operates in this mode collects experiences, objects, achievements, and relationships. Everything goes in the cart. The criterion is simple. Can I or can't I? If the answer is yes, it goes on the list. If you manifested it, that's a point on the scoreboard. Life becomes an accumulation game where the objective is to prove that the method works, that you've mastered the techniques, and that your ability to create reality is sharp. The problem is that this game never ends. There's always one more thing to get, one more proof of power to collect, and one more item to add to the spiritual resume. This is the consumption mindset applied to the field of conscious creation. And it carries the same emptiness that the consumption mindset carries in any other context. Accumulating doesn't fulfill. Collecting doesn't satisfy. The next achievement promises completeness and only delivers the impulse for the following achievement. The cycle perpetuates itself because the question sustaining it is the wrong question. The question that changes the game isn't, what can I manifest? It's another one. What have I been called to bring into the world? What kind of reality do I want to reinforce with my existence? What patterns do I choose to feed every time I use this creative capacity that I have? This change of question represents the passage from the consumption mindset to the co-authorship mindset. The creative field stops being a shopping mall and begins to be seen for what it really is. A space of possibilities through which life expresses itself in infinite ways. You're not there to grab as much as you can. You're there as a participant in a work that includes you, but goes beyond you. Every manifestation is a sentence you write in this work. Every state assumed and converted into experience adds something to the collective text. From this perspective, criteria emerge that the consumption mindset simply ignores. The first is internal integrity. This intention I'm about to transform into a decree. Is it coherent with my center? With what I recognize as true in myself when I'm in silence, without performance, without the need to impress anyone? Or is it one more attempt to fill a hole that no external achievement is going to fill? The second is relational impact. For this to exist in my life, does someone need to shrink? Does someone need to be used, manipulated, or diminished? Does the manifestation I'm seeking depend on someone losing so I can win? If the answer is yes, what I'm creating carries a distortion that's going to charge a price, from whoever was affected and from myself. The third is coherence with the field. If many people manifested in this same direction, would the world become more loving, more just, and more habitable? Or would it become more tense, more competitive, and more exclusionary? This criterion isn't abstract moralism. It's recognition that every individual creation contributes to the collective atmosphere. You're constantly voting with each state you assume for the type of reality you want to see multiplied. These filters don't limit the power to manifest. They don't diminish the reach of the creative law. They align the use of this law with something greater than the ego's immediate interest. They align with the very intelligence that sustains the field. When you manifest from this alignment, you're not just getting things. You're participating in a creative movement that includes you and transcends you at the same time. Manifesting stops being a collection and becomes a signature. Every creation carries the mark of who you chose to be. Every internal decree converted into an external fact says something about what you support, what you multiply, and what you choose to collaborate with. The question, should I manifest everything I can, answers itself when you understand this. It's not about being able to or not being able to. It's about recognizing that each use of creative capacity is an act of participation and deciding what kind of participation you want to have. The mature answer isn't to manifest less, it's to manifest with awareness. It's knowing that you're writing sentences in the story of the world every time you sustain a state and convert it into experience. It's choosing, with everything that word implies, what's worth writing. Every change begins with understanding your own role as a co-creator, and the only real path of access to this greater intelligence is meditation. We've developed a set of audio tools designed to assist in accessing this elevated state of consciousness. To learn more and get immediate access, click the link on the screen or in the comments. If this video made sense to you, write in the comments, "It made sense to me."